All right, everybody, we'll just go ahead and get started. We may have some more people who are trickling in. So just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending today. My name is Joshua Chris. I'm the GIS manager here at Jefferson County, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of GISAA for 2024. For those of you that don't know, GISAA is a nonprofit that supports GIS professionals across the state. We do things like training, guidance, providing opportunities to network, job opportunities, and ultimately the goal is to expand GIS recognition across the state. We also recently started a scholarship fund for GIS students in Alabama. We contributed to the University of North Alabama, and then we're looking to expand that out in the coming years. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded. We will post it to our website and YouTube channel. We'll also include a link in an upcoming newsletter. There is a chat screen, and I'll throw a chat in there in a minute. So feel free to enter any questions in there. We'll do our best to answer questions, or as many questions as possible. I think there'll be a couple breaks in between where Ben will do a live demonstration, so we'll try and answer some questions then. We can try and answer some in chat, and then we'll do our best, time permitting, to answer any at the end. And then last thing, please just mute your microphones if possible. Just be respectful of Ben's time. So with that, I'll just do a quick introduction. So we've got Benjamin Rance, who is the project lead for community resilience and the resilience analysis branch at the FEMA headquarters. And he's going to be demonstrating RAPT today. So RAPT is a free GIS web mapping application with over 100 preloaded data layers and easy to use analysis tools. RAPT supports emergency management decisions for outreach, planning, mitigation, response, and recovery. These data layers also support those outside of emergency management by providing authoritative data sources that support state and local governments, as well as those involved in standard business management. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Josh. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Awesome.
Yes.
Sounds good. All right. So, hi, my name is Benjamin Rance. I am the project lead for the Resilience Analysis and Planning Tool with FEMA. I'm just wanted to come on the camera and say hi. I'll probably turn my camera off as we go through the presentation, but I'll be going through and sharing some PowerPoint slides just to give everybody a quick overview. It's my understanding that most people on this call are pretty GIS savvy. So we're really going to focus on what data RAPT has and kind of what you can do with it, as opposed to the how. I think a lot of people on this call probably know how GIS works. So we're going to focus on the what a little bit. We're going to talk about RAPT, and then we'll get into a live demo of the tool. So I'm going to share my screen. We should be able to see my slideshow right now. If I can get a couple of thumbs up, just so I know. All right, awesome. That's great. So we're going to talk about the Resilience Analysis and Planning Tool, go through some slides. I will mention that my supervisor is on the call as well, Scott Malik. He's here to help answer any questions we might have. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Go ahead and, raise your hand if you want to ask a question during one of our breaks and whatnot. But we definitely encourage questions and feedback, especially from a group like everybody on this call. Anytime we can talk to people who are GIS specialists, GIS analysts who have a background in that, we really want your feedback and input on what you think of the tool, ways we can improve, and then also if we're hitting the right target. So if anybody's heard of the Resilience Analysis and Planning Tool before, just go ahead and give us a thumbs up in the chat. We always like to see if we've had people who have heard of it before. For those of you who are new to RAPT, just wanted to provide a quick overview. So the Resilience Analysis and Planning Tool gives everybody access to a free, no login required GIS capability. So it's publicly available. It's just found on the RAPT webpage. And the idea behind RAPT was to provide local emergency managers or community leaders who might not have a GIS background or who might not have full GIS support at their office due to resource constraints or something like that, with an opportunity to still harness the power of a lot of different GIS data layers and functionality to better understand their community. So to do this, we took over 100 different preloaded GIS layers that are really a combination of 3 different data sets. We have community demographic information, we have infrastructure information, and we have hazards, weather, and risk layers. So all of the data that you're going to see today is publicly available. We list all of our data sources on where we're pulling it from. So a lot of it is static data, and then we also pull REST services for our infrastructure and our hazards, risk, and weather layers. So you're able to, look at these three different data sets. You can visualize them on the map. You can see them in pop-ups, and then you can see them in tabular form as well. We combine this with some what we think are really powerful analysis tools. Users can add your own data layers temporarily, and then you can print or download all of the results and any of the information that you see in RAPT today as well. So we also include a little bit of information on community resilience. So what we have developed, we call the Community Resilience Challenges Index. This is based on a literature review of different published peer-reviewed methodologies that focus on community resilience and social vulnerability. So before we get into the tool, I just want to take a step back and emphasize how important the demographic data is in RAPT and kind of how we determined which community resilience indicators we use. How many people, just by a simple thumbs up, have heard of the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index, or the SVI? It was pretty popular during COVID. A lot of people used it to try to identify certain communities that might have greater vulnerability. And the SVI provides a couple scores for you. It gives you an overall vulnerability score, and it also provides a score for each of their 4 sub-indices that you can see there. So you can kind of see how your community compares to other communities. The next step that I think that we take is not only do we provide you with an overall value or a percentile for each of the counties and census tracts in the United States, we also provide you with all of the individual values for the 22 community resilience indicators that make up the CRCI. You can see a list of them right there. A number of them are the same indicators that the SVI uses. So we're trying to take the next step and say, not just say like, your community is the 50th percentile and the community next to you is the 60th percentile. We're saying this is your percentile and these are the specific indicators and the values of those indicators that lead to you being in that percentile. So I tend to lean on the CRCI when looking at community resilience, just because it provides a little bit more in-depth look at community resilience. And it's also based on a literature review of all of the available methodologies on community resilience and social vulnerability. So just wanted to kind of point that out, that if you've seen the SVI, if you've used that before, we have the Community Resilience Challenges Index, and we provide a little bit more information on those specific indicators that contribute to that value. So I've mentioned the indicators, what are they? Here's a slide with all of the indicators that we have included in RAPT. Most of these indicator layers come from the Census Bureau information. We're pulling the American Community Survey, or the ACS, the 5-year averages. And these are mostly available at the county, census tract, and tribal levels. So you can take a look, if you're a county administrator or an emergency manager, you can take a look at your whole county. The census tract layers are really great to kind of dive into and find specific areas where you might have a higher concentration of certain population demographics. And then obviously we wanted to include the important tribal and territorial layers as well, and as much information as we can provide for those. So here we have all of our community demographics data, again, at the county, census tract, and tribal level. In addition to the demographic data, we have infrastructure layers. Most of these are pulled as REST services, and these are pulled from the Homeland Infrastructure Foundation level data, or HIFIELD. It's their open platform. You can actually temporarily add additional infrastructure layers via the HIFIELD website if you want, by searching for data in RAPT, and I'll show you how to do that. But you can see a number of kind of important critical infrastructure pieces that we include as a default in RAPT. And then in addition to infrastructure and indicator layers, we have information on hazards, weather, and risk. So we have some historic information like tornadoes and hurricanes. We have risk information, including the FEMA flood hazard zones, seismic risk. We have the National Risk Index, the NRI. We have their expected annual loss. And then honestly, some of my favorite layers in the tool are the real-time layers that we pull from the National Weather Service. We have things like watches and warnings. We have the real-time radar. We also have a lot of different outlooks. So we have, current tropical cyclones and hurricanes. We have climate outlooks, fire outlooks, and stuff like that. So the idea is that you can combine all these different layers, and as a local emergency manager, instead of having to go to different places to find all of these data sets, we compile them all into one place, and then we make them easy to interact with. So we bin all of our community resilience indicator information. You can see that when we toggle a layer on, let's say it's for a census tract, you can see where on the map have census tracts with, higher concentrations of the population with a specific demographic characteristic. So, we're looking at percentage of households without a vehicle. I can take a look and see which census tracts have a higher percentage of those. You can also see that we give pop-ups at the county census tract and tribal levels. So again, not only visualizing the information on the map, but being able to take a look at the pop-up and get what specific value for that indicator for whatever level you're looking at. And then on the right, we want all of our information to be available in the attribute table as well. And then from the attribute table is where you can actually export that information to a CSV file in Excel, and then you can, sort, filter, and share however you'd like. So in addition to the three types of data sets that I mentioned, we also have some pretty powerful analysis tools. Again, designed and geared towards individuals who might not be GIS professionals. The first I want to mention is, users can add their own data. So you can temporarily add additional data layers. You can search for layers on ArcGIS Online. You can pull in REST services. You can add local shape files if you want. We actually have a curated data list as well with a number of different layers that emergency managers have told us are important or useful. These are temporarily added to RAPT. As soon as you close out or refresh your browser, those layers will be removed and you'll just start with the default layers. This is kind of a limitation of the tool, but we consider it definitely a worthy trade-off for it being publicly available to anybody within internet access. So we want to make sure that we keep the functionality and availability of RAPT open and free to the public. In addition to the ability to add data, we have a filter tool where you can, just kind of set a specific set of parameters, filter by those for like a specific hazard or an infrastructure, an indicator. So you can focus on a specific geographic area or data range that you want. And then we have the population counter and the incident analysis tool as well. So obviously, you're probably all familiar with the incident analysis tool. For instance, if we wanted a user to add different data layer, let's say they want to look for nuclear power plants, they can search for that, they can add it to the map. Clicking on it, they get the pop-up with relevant information and data fields, and then they can set that as a location for their incident analysis tool. And then what we can do is we can say, all right, give me a 50-mile radius around this nuclear power plant and summarize and show all of the hospitals within that area. So this is a way that RAPT is used, specifically like in the radiological emergency preparedness program. If you have these different radii that you need to say how many critical infrastructure entities are within 1 mile, 5 miles, 10 miles, and so on. And so we can actually use the incident analysis tool in RAPT to do that. Let's say we want to look at the same entity, but we really want to focus on the population surrounding it. Use that same entity, draw a 10-mile radius this time, and now we can use the population counter tool to actually look at provide an estimate for the total number of individuals within that area. So we can see for this 10-mile radius, it's about 245,000 people. And then, within that, you can see the list on the right. All of those different indicators are estimates that we can provide for number of individuals with that characteristic within that radius as well. So you can see if we're looking at population with a disability, within that same 10-mile radius, we're looking at almost, ish 22,000 individuals. So again, the idea being that you can combine multiple different data sets and different layers, whether that be infrastructure or community demographics or hazards or weather. You can combine those with some really powerful analysis tools to really look at emergency management for all phases of emergency management. So that's really kind of the value of RAPT and it being, very easy to use as well. So when we talk to emergency managers, we say, how can RAPT help me? Basically we're helping them identify specific threats and hazards that could affect their community, both their population and their critical infrastructure. And then what's the impact of those threats and hazards on their community? So how we do that is we kind of focus on different use cases. So for instance, if we are looking at heat risk, this is out in California, we have our, current, excessive heat warnings. We can take a look at where those are. And then we can take a look at population demographics in those areas. So for instance, on the bottom left, we can see where are there higher concentrations of individuals who are 65 and over. And then on the right, we can say, okay, within this excessive heat warning area, where are, our households without a vehicle? We can really use that to prioritize, the location of different cooling centers, any sort of augmentation to transportation lines that we might need. And just kind of promoting different outreach in response to some potential weather that we might be having. We could do hurricane, or this could be even just any storm evacuation. This example is looking at hospitals, but we could use the same tool to really look at any infrastructure entity. We can use the incident analysis tool, draw our projected storm path, toggle on some infrastructure within the area. And then, we're also looking at not only prioritizing hospitals for evacuation support, knowing which hospitals are within the impact zone or outside the impact zone, but underneath that, you can see we have our community demographics layers toggled on as well. So we're looking at percentage of households with limited English. We can see that those areas in the middle that are darker blue have higher percentages of the households with limited English. So how are we adjusting our outreach efforts, to reach those areas? So just way to kind of look at different data sets within the context of one specific incident. And then here's one that I like to look at. This is a real-time severe weather warning. So this is a flood warning. We can take a look at it. We can toggle on some critical infrastructure that's within the flood warning area. And then we can also take a look at equity. So we can use our population counter to, get an estimate for how many individuals are impacted by this flood warning. And then, how many individuals are vulnerable populations, such as over 65 or with a disability. We can look at the infrastructure within the severe weather warning. And then we can also determine which census tracts could have greater potential challenges to resiliency by looking at the Community Resilience Challenges Index information at the census tract level within this flood warning area. So from a preparedness perspective, we can identify hazards and risks like we talked about, really analyzing the impacted community demographics. You can get estimates for the total number of individuals with a specific characteristic within a specific area. And then we can really use it to look at capability gaps too. I think kind of looking at, the example that we like to use is, what are the total number of hospital beds within an impacted area? And if we had to evacuate all of those beds, do we have the capacity to do so? And what does that look like, so for planning purposes. In addition to the resilience analysis and planning tool, I have 2 slides on a couple of additional tools that we'll take a look at if we have time for our demo. The first one is the grant equity threshold tool. So this actually was designed for potential grant applicants, specifically for FEMA grants and the hazard mitigation assistance program. So that's flood mitigation assistance, or FMA grants, and then BRIC grants as well. And the grant equity threshold tool, or the GET, basically allows you to quickly calculate the percentage of the population within a benefiting area that fall within 3 different census tract types. The first is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, or CGEST. So go ahead and give us like a thumbs up if you've heard of CGEST. This is based on the Justice 40 initiative coming from the White House. And so a lot of times communities that can demonstrate that their benefiting area does benefit communities that are designated as disadvantaged via the CGEST tool. You can get more points on your grant application depending on the grant. We also provide information on FEMA's Community Disaster Resilience Zones, or CDRs. So go ahead and throw a thumbs up if you've heard of CDRs as well. So we have information on CDRs. And then, like I mentioned, we have information on the CRCI, the Community Resilience Challenges Index as well. So you create your benefiting area. You can either draw a unique shape like you have on there, like a polygon. You can use a community layer. So you can use like the city of Birmingham, or, the town of, wherever you would want. And you can also upload a shapefile into the tool. And then you run the tool, and it actually provides you with 5 different pieces of information and a number of different outputs that you have. You have the total population in the benefiting area. So you can see here in the visual, that's box 3. So it looks like about 42,500 people. As we move to the left, box 2 gives you the total population in that benefiting area that live in CGEST defined disadvantaged census tracts. So you can see that's about 33,000. And as we move to the left, box 1 gives you the percentage. So you can say, if this were our benefiting area, 78% of our population in the benefiting area live in these CGEST defined disadvantaged census tracts. And then if we go to box 4, we can have the percentage of the population in the benefiting area that live in the CDRs tracts. And then on the right, in the bottom right corner, you can kind of see the percentage of the population that live in each of the CRCI bins. So really great, just kind of quantitative information. You can also see on the right there, they give you 3 shape files that you can export. You can use your selected area, so you can upload that. You can export it and then upload it with your grant application. and we give you a couple other shape files as well. So just a really great dashboard. We're going to talk about how to get there, but just for anybody who might be interested in either grant applications or looking at kind of equity and community resilience, you can kind of see how all three of those different census tract designations kind of overlap and how they relate to each other. And then in addition to the grant equity threshold tool, we have the climate risk and resilience portal, or CLIMER. So this is another free open access tool. It really focuses on a dynamically downscaled climate forecast data, and that's for the continental United States and Puerto Rico. The CLIMER team examined simulated future climate conditions, and they look at mid of century and end of century for a range of different climate risks. They currently have information on heat index, minimum and maximum temperatures, degree days, fire weather index, precipitation, and wind speed averages. And so there are two main kind of services or tools that are offered by CLIMER. You can have location summaries and map explorers. The map explorers are in the bottom left. They provide nationwide maps focusing on one specific condition, and they have about 20 or 30 different layers for each outlook. So you could look at precipitation. You can look what is historical change versus mid-century with a high emissions, or mid-century versus a lower emissions. You can kind of look at different map explorers of all of the different climate risks. And then in the bottom right, we have location summaries. That summarizes all the key climate variables for a single 12-kilometer square grid. So they include some population demographic information as well. But these summaries are really great to kind of take a look at an overall view of, what could future climate conditions look like at mid and end of century for a number of these different climate risks. One thing we try to do, and one thing I will make sure I drop in the chat, is the link to the RAPT Resource Center. This provides a number of different great resources, including an overview of RAPT. We provide a number of different use cases.
Hey, Ben, I think you got muted accidentally. I think someone's trying to mute someone else.
Oh, all right. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we got you. And if everybody could just make sure you keep your mics on mute if possible. Thank you. Sorry, Ben.
Gotcha. Where did I leave off?
Just maybe 15 seconds back.
Okay, not bad. So yeah, the RAPT Resource Center, just making sure that everybody knows all the different resources we have there. If you're interested in how we came up with the 22 community resilience indicators, we have a full indicator analysis report. We have all of our data sources listed. We're trying to be very transparent and open with where we're pulling the data, just in case anybody else wants to go through and pull that data as well. We have a number of different user guides and FAQs, and then we actually have resource pages on the grant equity threshold tool and the climate risk and resilience portal as well. So we'll be sure to drop that in the chat. I always like to mention, especially for a GIS crowd like this, the FEMA Geospatial Resource Center is a free publicly available website that makes a lot of FEMA's GIS content easy to retrieve. They have hazard pages for 8 specific different disaster types. They have climate resilience resources. They have data on major incidents going back to 2020. You can find a link to RAPT there. You can also find a number of different tools. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Josh, I am going to check in with you really quickly just to see if we have any questions or anything else before we move on to the live demo.
No, I think we're good. Scott's been throwing the links in there and answering the questions, so I think we're all caught up.
Scott is very good at the fast typing and answering questions.
Yeah,
so
he's all over it.
Please challenge him, ask more questions in the chat, anything that anybody would want to know.
Try to stump me.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think Scott will have put a link to the RAPT Resource Center in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to be taking a look at the Resource Center, and then we're also going to be taking a look at some of the tools. So once you get to the Resource Center, it's pretty easy. We have a couple tabs up top. I do want to focus on the Data Sources tab. So again, putting all of our layers out there, you can take a look at where we're pulling our data sources. You have a box folder if you're trying to download all of the CRCI indicators at the census tract and the county level and the tribal level. We actually have included in here, if for instance, something doesn't look right, since we're pulling these sources from the authoritative websites, we're having you reach out directly to them to let them know. A lot of times we'll get people reaching out saying, this hospital closed in my town last month, but it still shows as open and wrapped. Highfield owns that data set, so we're making sure that people know how to reach out to Highfield so they can update that. For all of our population demographics, you can see our indicators listed, which specific table in the American Community Survey 5-year estimates we use. So we have all of our tables listed here. And then if you scroll down, infrastructure, like I said, a number of these are from Highfield. These are all REST services. And then for our hazards as well, we have a lot of them from the National Weather Service and everything like that. So at the top of any of these pages, you'll see take me to RAPT, and that's the first thing we'll do. And so if we look at the resilience analysis and planning tool, it has a sidebar with information that's open with a number of different great resources. I just like to close that so I can kind of focus on the map a little bit. And let's zoom into Alabama a little bit and just kind of show you how it looks. So again, if I'm a county emergency manager, if I'm looking at things from a county level or even a state level, I can go to our counties tab. I can toggle on our county's boundaries. Any boundary layer you have on toggled on, whether it's county, census tract, or tribal, once you click on one of those entities, you'll get a pop-up. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. And your pop-up will have information for that entity, also what the CRCI percentile is. And then it actually has, for all of the indicators available at that level, we have your values. So this is kind of where I said, it's kind of like the next step. It doesn't just give you an overall score or a sub-index score. We're providing you with the value at the county level and the census tract level and the tribal level of all of these different community resilience indicators. So you can really take a look at those. And now let's say I wanted to take a look, again at the county level, but I want to maybe look at a specific indicator like age over 65. I can toggle that on. We can see our legend right here. I can see maybe where there are higher concentrations of the population in the state. And if I were to click on one of these counties, I can see what county it is, what the population is, what the value is. So it looks like, 23.7% over age 65 and over. And then specifically for this one, that population, anytime you see a bar chart at the county level, it means we have a little bit more information. So I can say, well, how many individuals are between 65 and 69? It looks like a little over 1,000. And then 70 to 74, 75 to 79, and so on. And then, if we take a look and we view this information in the attribute table, we can actually get in 5-year increments all the way from under 5, 5 to 9, and so on, an estimate for the number of individuals. So you can kind of see where your, population is, in terms of their age. So really like to take a look at this, kind of show people how we kind of break these down right here. And also show people, anything you see on the map, you should be able to see in the attribute table as well. Again, when we think about local emergency managers using this, this is one of the key features is we want to make it as kind of simple and straightforward as possible. So let's say I want to look at a different indicator. Let's look at, we talked about, households without a smartphone. Let's see if we have some, so we can see we have some counties that have higher concentrations of that. We can see where they are. And if we were to click on one of those counties, we can see, what the percentage of households without a smartphone is. It looks like a little over 33%, so about a third, actually almost exactly a third. And then we can see how that relates to the national average. So again, different ways to kind of look at this information at the county level. Another thing we can do is look at information at the census tract level. So I'm just going to zoom in on Birmingham a little bit because I think it kind of gives us a good mixture of kind of a little bit rural outside and then urban downtown. Again, if we toggle on our census tract layer, we can see all of the census tracts appear on our map. If we were to click on one, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. Now we're looking at census tract, what the population is, what the CRCI percentile is, and then we have a number of our indicators listed right here. So we can see what our values are for our census tracts for the 22 indicators that we have. Again, we can click on another one. And then again, at the census tract level, let's say we wanted to look at that same information, age 65 and over. Now we can see at a little more granular level where are specific census tracts that might have higher concentrations of those populations. So I can click on that. And at the census tract level, it'll give us the population in the census tract and also what the value is for this indicator. So about 27.5% for this specific census tract. One thing I do like to do, so it seemed like we had a lot like in Southwest Alabama. So let's take a look at, households without a smartphone. Let's toggle that on and see if we can, see it was kind of like this area. It seems like we have a lot of census tracts in this area that seem to be a little bit darker. So if we click on some of these census tracts, we can see what the population is. We can say, okay, households without a smartphone, 57%. I can toggle on this one, 50%, 49.1%. And then another indicator that we like to look at is, percentage of the population without a broadband subscription. So again, it's kind of this same area. So if I click on these census tracts, here's 62, almost 63%. Here's 73%. And this is at the census tract level. Again, we're talking about population without a broadband subscription. This is 75%. So one thing I like to do, just because from a FEMA perspective, I think we're constantly telling people, how we're sending them messages or click on this link to check your application online. And I think it's important to kind of look at the overlap of these layers and say, well, in this census tract, almost 72% of the population doesn't have a broadband subscription, and over 57% of households don't have a smartphone. So how are we tailoring our outreach? How are we tailoring our messaging? And we've heard from FEMA staff and even local emergency managers that say, really, when you get in there and start playing with these census tract layers, this is great information to know, because you might, you could have relatives or you have friends or this area, maybe you're from here. So you kind of generally know a little bit about the population demographics, but this really breaks it down at the census tract level where you can target specific outreach efforts and say, well, if we know, 50%, 75% without broadband subscription and 50% without a smartphone, how are we going to reach individuals if there is an emergency? And then we can do things and overlay radio tower coverage, right? We can overlay TV station coverage in this area. So how are we reaching people in other ways that might not always rely on a smartphone or the internet? So just like to show that, as well as just kind of the power of combining certain layers and taking a look at some of these things. If we want to, so now if we're looking, let's look at infrastructure. Obviously we can take a look at hospitals. We can see where those are, give us our information on the type of hospital that it is, where it is, how many beds it has, and a number of pieces of information of this. One thing we can do, like I mentioned, is, I like to use this time to look at our filter tool. So here are all of the hospitals in the United States. It looks like the United States has chickenpox. And if we take a look at our filter tool, we can say, all right, well, I just want to look at Alabama and I want to toggle that on. Okay, so now I'm just looking at, from a state level, here are all of our hospitals, right? So I can take this list. If I view this in the attribute table from here, from the layer list, I can export it. So that way I can share this with everybody. And now let's say, all right, well, I want all the hospitals, but I only want to look at maybe psychiatric hospitals. So we can see where those are throughout the state, right? We can take a look at different filters, and based on the parameters that we set, we can actually get different information, So we can take a look at this, and even if I wanted to pull a snip of this or print off a picture of it, I could, so that way I could share this with other folks. So that's just one way to kind of use our filter tool a little bit. Let's zoom back in on, well, actually, I'll stay zoomed out a little bit. Along with our infrastructure information, I mentioned we have hazards, weather, and risk. So we have some historical information, so we can take a look at hurricane tracks. Where are these hurricane tracks? Looks like there was a big one right here, Opal, 1995. Looks like we also have over here Hurricane Dennis in 2005. So we can take a look at where these are right here. And then just using this same hurricane track, let's say we're just looking at this red section right here where it was at its strongest, right? This like what category it was. Looks like it was probably a category 4 coming through here. We can take this and use this as our location for our incident analysis tool. So I can say, all right, using this specific hurricane track, if we had another hurricane that same intensity come through the same area, and let's say I wanted a 10-mile buffer zone, what are all my infrastructure entities within 10 miles of this, right? So we can then take a look at this specific segment of the hurricane, where are all my hospitals, and here we have all of our critical infrastructure. This kind of goes back to the use case that we talked about in the slideshow. Let's say I'm looking at public schools for either, shelter operations. I can take a look, within a 10-mile radius, where are all of our public schools within this area? So just kind of a way of using a combination of layers, using our hazard information, historical information, along with our incident analysis tool to really kind of see where these infrastructure entities are. And then, as with anything in the tool, if I hit the download button, you'll see it'll open right here. and it'll tell me where I want to download, and I can save that. So I can, all of the information that's in the pop-ups will be in a Excel spreadsheet for this.
Hey,
I'm gonna,
Benjamin,
yeah, go
can
ahead.
you print the map too? Just that was a question in chat, and I said you get to it in demo if they want to do a map instead.
Yeah, for sure. So let's take this same one, right? So let's say we wanted to set this as our location, 10 miles, and we're taking a look at public schools. Let's say we wanted to look at something in our toolbox up here. We have a number of different tools. We can draw, we can print, and we can take a measurement. So let's say we wanted to look, let's toggle on a couple more layers, and I want to look at, in this area right here in Alabama over by Mobile. Let's say I wanted to look at the community demographic information. Let's say we're looking at age 65 and over at the census tract level. I can see where these census tracts are right over here by Mobile, Alabama. And I want to take a look at infrastructure. Let's just toggle on hospitals since we were talking about them earlier. If I wanted to print this map right here with the legends, I can go to my toolbox. I go to my print, I can, give it an example, give it a title. I can change some advanced options, but really I can hit print. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a PDF of what we see here on the screen with all of our layers toggled on, and it'll actually provide us a legend as well. So here's our RAPT example. If I click on it, it'll open up in a new tab, and we can see here it is. That's the title I gave it. Here are the layers we're looking at. And then we can see we have a number of different legends right here. This is a legends for all of the layers we have toggled on. That's a great question. I think a lot of times I'll just like take a snip of this, but then I have to snip the legend as well, and a different other things. So the print tool is actually really important. So yeah, you can easily take a print or a screenshot and create that PDF, and you can share with anybody. I'm gonna toggle these off really quickly while we talk about some other features of the tool, and then we can kind of get into if anybody else has any questions or specific aspects they want to look at. I do want to talk about the add data tool really quickly. So let's stay down here in Mobile. Let's say we wanted to take a look at this area. And again, a lot of the information we have here is in county or census tract, but we do recognize that, not everything happens at the county or census tract level. So if we go to our add data tool, we could search for different layers. Again, we can pull in REST services, we can add or upload specific files. But in our search layer, we actually have a suggested layer list. I told you this is based on feedback we received from emergency managers. We have things like about what active hurricanes, we have wildfire, we have different poverty status variables, drought intensity, the national shelter system, air quality monitoring. If we scroll down, one of the layers we have are the communities layer. So I can actually add the communities layer on, and then you'll see the map will reflect and update with all of the different communities we have here. So now if I click on this, I have the city outline, and you can actually see in blue where this city outline is. And if I click up here, we have, different townships and different counties and different villages right here in different cities. So we can really take a look at, different areas. So let's just say I wanted to look at, this area right up here. It looks like the city of Pritchard. This is just outside of Mobile. I can take a look at the city of Pritchard, and I can say, okay, let's set this as the input of my population counter. So now I go over to my population counter. It has my input. So instead of drawing a shape like I showed on the PowerPoint, I can just use this as the input. Now I have the actual city boundary because we added the communities layer. And I want to look at how many individuals have a disability within the city of Pritchard. So it'll run the calculation based on the information we have available at the census tract level, and it will provide me with an estimate for the total number of individuals with a disability in the city of Pritchard. So, from a city perspective, I think this could be really important. We're talking about outreach, we're talking about communication, we're also talking about representation. We want to ensure that the decisions we make and the processes that we have at a city level are incorporating all of the different population demographics and all the different populations in our area. So we can see right here, we have our area that's selected. We have about 3,100 people with a disability in this area. And then the best thing I like to recommend, especially, for a little bit more advanced GIS users, is I like to view this in the attribute table, because this right here, if we view this in the attribute table, This gives us all of our census tracts within the city. You can see them listed right here with their GeoID, their unique GeoID at the census tract level. And then you'll also see it gives us all of the information for our community resilience indicators. So for each census tract that's a part of the city of Pritchard, I can, high school diploma, age 65 or over, disability, without a vehicle, and so on, all of our indicators. And so what I can do is I can go to options, export this to a CSV. If I hit OK, it will actually open a CSV file. And then, for instance, if I'm a city manager, I want to say, all right, I'm going to focus our efforts on, how where do we have the highest percentage of households without a smartphone? We can figure out those exact specific census tracts and see what other characteristics they have that might be in common, or we can see where they're located within the town. So just a way to kind of use different layers again combined with our analysis tools to really kind of provide a holistic view. I've talked about a lot of the tools in RAPT. I do want to make sure that we talk about Climber as well. So are there any questions on the resilience analysis and planning tool before I kind of move over to the climate risk and resilience portal?
There's nothing in the chat. Scott's still taking care of everybody, but if anybody has any other questions they want to ask.
Hey, Benjamin, I just want to, we worked a lot with Jeanette Bird, who's on the line, of using RAPT to include GIS imagery and stuff in grant applications, plans. I think FEMA expects a lot these days from grant applications, and adding a GIS snip picture showing the benefit is definitely gives you a leg up, not just FEMA, but maybe other federal agencies in the state as well. So I just going to add that there and do a shout out to Jeanette.
Yeah, great job. I'm going to share my screen while we kind of take a look at some of the other tools. So right here, we have the resilience analysis and planning tool. As I mentioned, I do want to take a look at the other layers we have here. So the climate risk and resilience portal, I'm going to copy this and just drop this in the chat really quickly to make sure that everybody has it. If you want to follow along, there's the RAPT Resource Center, and then here is Climber. The climate risk and resilience portal, like I mentioned, really looks at kind of future climate conditions based on dynamically downscaled climate modeling for a number of different risks. And they have three main things. One are local climate projections, national map explorers, and then they have their data catalog. So I'm just going to talk about some of the local climate projections and the national map explorers. So if we go to local climate projections, basically they have this information for future climate conditions at a number of different points, so mid-century and end of century, and for two different emission scenarios, a higher emission and a lower emission scenario. So it tells you how to use the tool. So if you just hit close, let's say we want to zoom in on Alabama again. And let's say we're back up here in the Birmingham area. One thing we can do is we can click on an area of the map. And again, these are 12-kilometer square grids. And for each grid, it will provide you a number of pieces of information. The default is always looking at like degree days. So we can see average temperature, the maximum average temperature, what the historical information is, what it's going to be given like a lower emission scenario, and what it would be in a higher emission scenario. And we see a number of different pieces of information, how it changes mid-century at lower emissions versus mid-century at higher emissions. A couple of things we can do. One thing is we can change what we're looking at. So let's say for this area, I want to look at precipitation. I want to say, how will precipitation between now and the end of century if we're looking at annual precipitation? So we can see how it adjusts. Historically, we have 23 days without precipitation. For the lower emission scenario at the end of century, we would have 24. And then, at the end of century, we would have 28. So, if we're just looking at this, we're saying, okay, it looks like it might actually be a little bit drier as we go through higher emissions scenarios at the end of century. And then we have how much annual precipitations, right? So historically, 47.9 inches, lower emission scenario, 53 inches, and higher emission scenario, 58 inches. So, we're getting more days without precipitation, but more precipitation overall, right? So are we thinking stronger storms, heavier rainstorms? And there are a number of different layers we can toggle on. So we can take a look at days without annual precipitation. Let's look at historical, right? What does that look like? And we can zoom out and see kind of what that looks like on the map. And you have our legend right here. We can take a look at, okay, if we have a mid-emission scenario, what that means. And if we have a higher emission scenario, what that means. So we can take a look at how those change over time. We can toggle on all these different layers. You'll see some resilience layers. These are, based on the information we have in RAPT, and we even have our Community Resilience Challenges Index. We can toggle that layer on and see what that looks like for specific areas. So we can do a good job of, kind of taking a look at different critical infrastructure. So it's really kind of taking a look at different aspects of future climate. And then the biggest part about this is we can actually generate a report. So let's say I want to look at precipitation and I want to generate a report. We just click on generate reports. We're looking at precipitation. I'm just going to zoom in on this a little bit. We'll have information on the area. So we have a couple pieces of information. If we scroll down, we have a kind of like anecdotal or qualitative information, kind of showing how it changes between mid-century and end of century. And then we have some climate stats. So again, we're looking at days without precipitation, historical, mid-century low and high emissions, end of century low and high emissions. And then we have how many inches of rain or precipitation are we getting? Mid-century low and high, end of century low and high. So really just a great way to kind of take this information that maybe visually it's great to look at on a map, but you want it in a clear, concise location. You can run a report with this. You can also generate a report on all of the variables. So instead of just looking at precipitation like we were, here's a report on all the variables. So we include temperature, historical temperature information, how that changes mid-century and end of century for both of the emission scenarios, heat index information, wildfire risk information. Here's the precipitation information that we looked at, and then we also have average wind speed. So really great. We can use light or dark mode for these. If we want to print them off, we could go into light mode, so that way it saves on ink, when we're printing on, a white piece of paper, and we can kind of take a look. So again, these are for 12 kilometer square grids, and that's because they have this information already available at a 12 kilometer square. You can see if we click over, it has a new square with new information. So they have this information for each 12 kilometer square grid already. And then we just click on a grid, and then it will provide you with the information for that area. Another aspect of climate are the National Map Explorers. These are really neat. So we were talking about precipitation earlier. We can, click on our National Map Explorer, take a look at precipitation. Sometimes this will pop up if there's a layer that isn't loading. If you just hit cancel, it will let you go. A lot of times the snap layer, gives us issues, but we always have our tech team take a look at that. And so, now we can go down here to Alabama. We can see, all right, how does precipitation change on a state level, across time, and here are a number of our different layers that we have. So my favorite precipitation layers to look at are the change in precipitation, right? So if we were looking at precipitation change in annual and historical end of century high emission scenarios, we can kind of see what this looks like, So if we zoom out from a national perspective, we can see where is it going to get drier, where are we going to have more precipitation, and then if we were to click on one of these counties, let's say we just want to click on Jefferson County, we can actually get, similar to what was in our location summary, we can have a number of different pieces of information, but here it's in tabular form. We can take a look at those. So for each of these map explorers, like I said, we have 20 or 30 different layers, a lot of them. So for each of these changes, we'll have historical versus end of century high emissions, mid-century high emissions, end of century low emissions, and mid-century low emissions. So a number of different layers to kind of take a look at. So lots of time spent playing with the climber. Another tool that we have, just to show, before I want to leave a couple minutes for questions at the end, is the grant equity threshold tool. Just to kind of show it really quickly, let's zoom in on Alabama and just kind of see, what we're looking at. Let's take a look at Montgomery right here. So I mentioned that the Climate Risk and Resilience Portal has information on 3 different census tract designations: the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, or CJEST, CEDARS, and CRCI. So let's say we're looking at Montgomery and I say, okay, I'm gonna, have a grant project, and my benefiting area is going to be this area right here. Kind of select your area. You can actually use some of our data layers as well. So we could use a community's boundary if we wanted to, if we wanted just the city or just a township outside of it. But we can see we have CGIS information. If we click on any of these census tracts, it'll tell us which criteria meets, or which categories meet the threshold for being disadvantaged, and how many disadvantaged tracts are in your county and in your state. And then for each of these, if we make this bigger, it has the 8 categories listed. So you can kind of see for each indicator or for each threshold in that category what the value is at that census tract. So you can kind of see which ones meet the threshold. And then again, let's say we draw our area. This is my benefiting area. We hit run, and then you'll see the bottom will populate with the 5 pieces of information that we mentioned before. So we can say, in our benefiting area, out of this total number of individuals, this many live in CGIS disadvantaged census tracts, and it gives us a 73% in our benefiting area that would benefit individuals living in CGIS disadvantaged tracts. And then here we have all of our outputs as well. So we can toggle off these layers. So for instance, if we just wanted to look at our benefiting area, I can take a look at this, export it to GeoJSON, or save it to my content. I can take a look at the layer where we just see all of our census tracts within here. All these green census tracts are the CGIS. And then I have one where we look at CRCI and CEDAR's information. So 3 great tools. You can get lost in a Climber. There's so many layers, and this is just for precipitation. Again, if we go back, we can take a look at a different map explorer and looking at different local climate predictions, projections. A lot of great information in RAPT2, over 100 different data layers. You can actually take this layer. If I were to export it to a GeoJSON, like a shape file, I can actually take this layer, upload it into RAPT. So now I'm looking at the same exact area, and I can look at what are the community demographics within there. So in addition to this information I have for a grant application, I could tell you all of the critical infrastructure within our benefiting area. What's the estimated number of individuals with a disability or over 65, and so on. So really great way to look at information, all 3 of these different tools. So Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know we got about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure we leave time for questions or any other announcements you might have.
Yeah, no other announcements from me. There's, I think Scott has answered every question that's come up in the chat. So I'll just want to thank you and Scott very much for your time and for the presentation. This amazing tool. I wasn't aware of all the capabilities. I really appreciate you going through in such detail and all the different apps that FEMA has. This is really awesome. If anybody has any questions, we've got a couple minutes left. If not, we recorded this, so we'll be downloading this in the next few days and push that up to our YouTube channel. We'll put links in our Slack channels, as well as post that on a newsletter and our website. So, but yeah, thank you everybody for attending, and thank you, Ben and Scott. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Josh, no problem. I just dropped our contact information for our inbox. So if you have any, we always love to hear from, GIS professionals. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything, please feel free to reach out to us. It's the FEMA-TA request at fema.dhs.gov email that I just dropped in there. Happy to hear from you, and we really hope everybody benefited and enjoyed the presentation. So thank you very much for the chance to present.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.